Okay. So first, thank you all for joining us. If you have questions, you can feel free to use the chat. I will monitor the chat and ask questions as it seems appropriate. If there's not a natural breaking point, we'll wait until the end, but we did buffer in enough time to have people share questions. So please use the chat for that. And then without any further waiting, I just want to take this moment to introduce Deborah Kadrawi, who is the founder of the Abyssinian Meeting House Restoration Project and is one of their current board members. And so, Debbie, if you want to take it away, let us know your story and the story of the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette. I'm Debbie Cummings Kadrawi. As she said, I actually founded the nonprofit back in 1997, and I'm finding it all very weird to be looking at myself. So bear with me if my eyes are doing weird things right now. I should be wearing glasses. I founded the project Restoration Effort in 1997. I think we met John and Greg and Martha. You'll hear me refer to them as the A team. They were the original team that really steered the project, led us to our historic structures reports, and ultimately the roadmap for what is now the restoration of the Abyssinian, the actual physical restoration of the project. As I said, I started it in 1997. I was living away from home down in Atlanta. I had a baby and I decided to move to Atlanta to get a job with the Olympics people that were in Atlanta at the time, when I read an article in the Portland Press Herald that was an editorial by George Naval. I don't know if the folks online remember George, but he was the editorial page editor and had a fondness for the Abyssinian, because every time he walked from his home, which is on Munjoy Hill, down to the Portland Press Herald, which was on Congress Street at the time, he'd walk by this building, this old, what appeared to be dilapidated old building with horrible siding on it. And it was not occupied at the time. And he really thought somebody should do something about the building. And that was the editorial he wrote that I just happened to read at the time. Now, if you believe that nothing is by accident, as I do, I believe that it was a divine blessing, divine intervention, if you will. And I was home with a small child, and I said, well, this is doable. So we can raise this money and do this in a year or so. You guys appreciate that. And so thus was born the Committee to Restore the Abyssinian. And it was a committee because at the time, the leadership, if you will, leadership in the African-American community was primarily centered in Portland and in Bangor. And so those were the people that I invited to join us on the committee. They included my father, Leonard Cummings, and several other people, including Tim Wilson. And we worked tirelessly for the first couple of years just to even pull the project together. Everywhere I went, people I talked to said that this old dilapidated building was not a historic structure, nor could it be. Until a couple of years into looking to help guide us, did I meet, I can't remember his name, Earl Shuttlesworth. Had a friend of his that happened to be involved with the Portland Museum of Art, Everett Perlman and Hillary Bassett. Some of you might know both of them. And it was Hillary and Earl and Everett who talked to me about talking at greater length with Shuttlesworth. That conversation allowed them to want to be able to listen more to the story of the Abyssinian. And thus the historic structures reports were born. I couldn't believe it. I can't still believe how much money they cost to write. And for those of you that have an interest in historic structures reports and architectural restoration, the historic structures report is everything. Greg is going to talk to you more about that. And Greg and John and ultimately Martha, who was brought into the project to do the archaeological work, all had a much greater understanding and appreciation of what was entailed. And as I say, that was the beginning of our project. My family became more and more involved, and less of the community's involvement, just because people didn't have 25 years to donate to the restoration effort. My father retired shortly after that, and he was able to give more of his time. He had a couple friends, Paul, some of you may know David was involved with us a lot in the beginning. A lot of folk, if you will, were involved, and you'll hear me use the term folk, meaning Black folk, were really involved in our project in the beginning. The ministers of the church, including Reverend Lawson and Bishop Coleman, who was with Williams Temple. Reverend Lawson was with Green Memorial. I mean, it goes way back to the very beginning, 1997, as I said. My whole family grew up at Green Memorial Church. And so this was about a mile away from Green Memorial, down the hill a little bit. So it was all a natural fit. Pam, who many of you might know, Pam Cummings, who's my sister and is now leading the effort more so from a structural perspective, came in a little bit later. She might be on the phone, on the Zoom meeting with us now. She was certainly invited to join us. We had a lot of people come and go, but Leonard and Pamela and really me have really stuck with it. And thanks, Jeanette, for, yes, I am a board member. I do a lot of the fundraising. So all of you can expect a call from me after we're done with all of this. We encourage you to go to our website. You can find us on Facebook on the website. I'm always looking for people to volunteer. Pammy wanted me to be sure to invite you to consider becoming a member of the building committee, which is quite active. Greg will talk more about the building itself. We are just completing the exterior restoration with the completion of the new windows on the first floor and the bottom floor and the doors. The brick restoration, I just got an email from Greater Portland Landmarks today, who have been longstanding partners with us, that they're going to do a piece on Ron, whose last name I can't remember, Richard, whose last name I'm not remembering right now, who did the brickwork last year for us. And the window work has been done by Wright Ryan, whom some of you may know as well. So I don't know how much more time I've got. I know we're on a tight schedule here, so I'm going to stop talking because really you don't want to hear from me. You want to hear from Greg and Martha. So let me introduce, I guess we'll go next to Greg, Jeanette,
Yes,
or Martha,
that's
whichever
great.
one. You guys have worked it out. They're new. They're not new to this. This is not their first time.
Thank you, Debbie. Yeah, so we'll go to
Go ahead.
Greg.
I'm going to mute myself.
Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, Jeanette. And thank you all for joining us to hear a little more about the Abyssinian Meeting House. Debbie mentioned that we got involved more than 20 years ago with the initial historic structure report for the building. And as most of you probably know, the historic structure report is usually a collaborative effort. So we had on our team myself as historian, John James as architect, Martha Pinello as archaeologist. We also had an engineer, we had a materials specialist and a finish specialist, and then we called in other people as needed. So it takes a lot of different perspectives to look closely at a building and to figure out what is it actually telling us. And the big question when we first approached this building was, is this really the Abyssinian? Is it really the 1827 meeting house that was built by the Black population of Portland? Or has it been so compromised and so altered over time that there may be remnants of it, but nothing really with integrity? And surprisingly to all of us, it's really there. That made the project especially exciting and allowed it to proceed. So let me start by giving you a little background on the historical research that we did with the help of the Maine Historical Society, which happens to have the original record books for the Abyssinian congregation. And to us, the Abyssinian Meeting House represents a remarkable story of self-determination by a leading segment of the Black community in Portland in the 19th century. When Maine separated from Massachusetts in 1820 as a separate state, the federal census counted a statewide population of 8,600 people. That's statewide, 8,600 people. but that included 929 free colored persons, mainly in the Portland area. And the state constitution that was adopted in 1820 declared that all men are born equally free and independent, and it granted all fit males the right to education and the right to vote. Portland's population in the first half of the 19th century, the Black population consisted mainly of free Blacks who were born in New England and New York. There were some from maritime Canada and a few from the Caribbean colonies. Many of the Black men were employed as longshoremen and dock workers, and resident Black population included experienced sailors, teamsters, artisans, merchants, hairdressers, and barbers. Now, let me bring up our first slide if I can share the screen here. Hang on. Okay. And this was the first clue for us. This was the 1835 or 1836 representation of the meeting house on a wall map of Portland. And that wall map was ornamented around the edges with illustrations of various public buildings, including this little view of the Abyssinian Meeting House. And all of this started with a newspaper notice that was published in the Portland paper in September of 1826. And I'll read just a segment of it. This was a notice to the public. The undersigned addressed themselves to the citizens of Portland to solicit the kind attention of the benevolent, the pious, and the humane to the moral and religious condition of our people settled in this place. Our numbers amount to about 600. Provision for the accommodation of a very few of our people is made in houses of public worship. The privilege granted in circumstances calculated to repel rather than to invite our attendance. Pardon our misapprehension if we have sometimes thought our attendance was not desired. We are persuaded that nothing would so much contribute to improve the character and raise the tone of moral feeling among our people as the erection for their use of a suitable house for public worship and the regular ministration of the gospel. The signers were 6 Black members of the Second Congregational Society, and they were objecting to the fact that they and other Black families were relegated to the gallery of the Congregational Meeting House and not allowed to rent pews on the main floor. What they had in common was a desire to be treated with respect. Within the next few years, they had purchased a parcel of land on Sumner Street, which is now Newbury Street. They had built the Abyssinian Meeting House that you see on this slide. They had assembled a strong congregation, and they had called a series of well-known ministers who were leaders, national leaders, in the civil rights and anti-slavery movements. This move to establish a separate Black congregation within the mainstream churches was part of a national trend that started with the establishment of Mother Bethel Church in Philadelphia in 1787 and spread to New York City with the first Black church in New York in 1796, a Black church in Boston in 1805, in Hartford in 1819, in Portsmouth in 1823, in Newport in 1824, and Nantucket in 1827. The publication of that first notice in Portland in 1826 demonstrated more than anything else that there was close communication between the Black leaders in all of these port cities throughout the Northeast, and that they were coordinating a strategy, an emerging strategy for achieving civic and religious equality. In February of 1828, 22 Black residents in Portland officially organized the Abyssinian Religious Society, choosing a name that clearly spoke to Black pride. And by the spring of 1830, the meeting house had been erected and a committee was appointed to oversee the finishing of the interior. This is the map of Portland in 1836. And you can see it's a portion of the map, but you can see some of the illustrations of the public buildings, including the Abyssinian, not in their actual locations, but just as illustrations on the map. The new congregation at the Abyssinian joined its sister churches as the fourth parish congregational in 1835. And identifying themselves as congregational was very important because that was the lead church in the community. That was the lead force. So they did not identify initially as Methodist or Baptist or any of the traditional Black denominations, but rather as congregational. And the Abyssinian Meeting House quickly became the center of Black life in Portland, hosting prominent anti-slavery speakers, abolitionist rallies, and serving as a key station on the Underground Railroad, offering fugitives the last leg of the route to freedom in Canada. The Abyssinian Meeting House also accommodated Portland's colored school. Portland had established a segregated school for Black children in 1827, and the town had hoped to incorporate the school in the design of the new Abyssinian Meeting House, but the town and the church leaders could not agree on the financial terms. In 1845, through the efforts of Reverend Amos Freeman, the pastor at Abyssinian, the vestry, or lower story of the church, was leased to the Portland School Committee and renovated to accommodate the 75 students of the colored school. A colored convention held in Portland in 1850 praised the value of Black education for children, but specifically protested churches and schools which make discrimination on account of complexional or other accidental differences. The Abyssinian Meeting House hosted Portland's colored school for 11 years. And in the fall of 1856, the school committee decided to integrate the city's public schools and sports teams. The move was primarily touted as a cost-saving measure, but it also reflected a changing attitude in the community at large. The Great Fire of July 4th and 5th, 1866 was a pivotal event in the history of Portland and resulted in the loss of many of the city's early public buildings. The fire in 1866 destroyed 1,500 buildings, 1/3 of the city, and left 12,000 people homeless in Portland. The Abyssinian Meeting House, remarkably, was one of the few buildings saved in the area ravaged by the fire. It was preserved largely through the efforts of a Black fireman, William Wilberforce Ruby, the son of one of the founders of the Abyssinian congregation, and named clearly after the leading British abolitionist. After the Civil War, a second generation of leadership developed among the members of the Abyssinian Church. Women assumed a much more active role and were no longer content to participate solely through the Ladies' Aid Society, the Sewing Circle, and the missionary support organizations. Black women served as leading officers on the Finance Committee and on the board of the Abyssinian Society. There's a map from 1871 just indicating what is now Newbury Street. It was renamed after the fire in 1866, and the location of the Abyssinian Meeting House. The Abyssinian Meeting House was repaired and updated in the 1870s to meet the needs of the expanding congregation. This is a bird's eye view or perspective view of Portland in 1876. And here, as we zoom in, is the meeting house itself, circled in red. Church suppers and entertainments were offered periodically at the meeting house. Fairs and levies helped raise money for a new organ and for gas lights in the meeting house. Entertainments, variety suppers, and frequent concerts established the Abyssinian as a central focus of social life for the Black community. In addition to church-sponsored events, the lower level of the meeting house was rented out for other community uses. The YMCA held prayer meetings at the lower level, and the Pocahontas Lodge met there regularly. For the Abyssinian congregation, that period of optimism ended with the tragic wreck of the passenger steamer Portland during the Great November Gale of 1898. The ship had a capacity of 800 passengers, and the normal crew of 65 included 40 Black residents of Portland. On Thanksgiving weekend in 1898, the ship left Boston on Saturday for its scheduled overnight trip to Portland. but extreme weather caused it to sink off Cape Cod early Sunday morning. All of the 200 people on board were killed. And those lost in the disaster included most of the leading members and deacons of the Abyssinian Church. By 1900, Portland's Black population was much more dispersed throughout the city, with many Blacks living and working at the west end of the city near the new railroad station. Black men and women were increasingly employed in domestic and institutional service jobs. They also increasingly entered professions as doctors, teachers, merchants, and artisans, reflecting their gradual integration of the community. With the decline in membership, the congregation sold the Abyssinian Meeting House in 1917, and the members dispersed to other local churches. The building was used for several years as a stable and a junkyard, then sold again in 1924 and remodeled as a tenement to serve the growing Italian population. And this is a photo from the city assessor's office in 1924, showing the building newly remodeled as a tenement. The apartments were eventually condemned for unsafe conditions in 1991, and the city subsequently foreclosed on the property for unpaid taxes. This map from 1926, when the building had been converted to a tenement, still identifies it as the Abyssinian Church, which helped to verify for us that the church was not taken down and replaced by a tenement, but actually converted to a tenement. In 1998, the building was purchased by the Committee to Restore the Abyssinian Meeting House. And shortly after the purchase, they stripped off the white vinyl siding that adorned the tenement to begin the exploration. And here's where the story of investigation and eventual restoration begins. Jeanette, over to you.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, Greg, if you stop sharing your screen, then we can maybe switch over to Martha. So as I mentioned, when we got started, everyone, we did have some technical difficulties, and that was in connecting John James, who was the restoration architect. So I just want to pause for a moment to give John, if you are connected, we tried to have you call in. If you're on your telephone and are able to, we'd love to hear from you. And if you're not, I'm just going to pause for a second and just see if there's an opportunity here for you to share your part of the conversation. And then if not, then we'll move over to Martha. And it seems to me like we're still having that technical difficulty in making that connection, unfortunately, with John. So Martha, if you wouldn't mind sharing your work, and then after Martha's work, we'll all chat and be available for additional conversation. Thanks.
Okay, how are we? Let's see. Are we there, Janet?
I can see you, and we just need you to, I know you have some slides, so if you want to share your screen, and we can help you through that if you're having any
I think
issues.
I might be. I'm
okay.
okay.
So
to expedite this, we're going to ask for your assistance, and what I am going to do is share screen.
Yep.
And there.
And we can see your screen.
I apologize, I'm new at this.
No, you're fine. It's always tricky when you're live.
Okay.
I can see it. It looks great to me. Is it working all right for you, Martha?
Yes, let me go back, and it is. Yes.
Okay, excellent.
Okay. So what I'd like to do is to share with you, as an archaeologist and as a team of archaeologists who worked with the Restore the Abyssinian Committee and with Greg and John James, what we were able to find. And some of the images I'm going to show you are historic images, which will build on some of what Greg has talked about, but also some of the archaeological finds. And I'm going to be honest with you right now, is that a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is water. And perhaps there's some theological thought for that, but really what that's based on goes so deep as to why the building was able to be built there, why the property was able to be purchased for a price that was appropriate for what the funds were available, and then how did the church and the members of the Black community in Portland use that water to their benefit and for the trades they were involved in. So on this slide, you can see that there is a area labeled swamp. That is the location of the Abyssinian Meeting House. And that is the location of Reuben Ruby's purchase of land. So as a freed Black man, as the patron in many ways, the major benefactor of the beginning of the Abyssinian in terms of land, he was able to purchase this land. For those of you who know Portland, the cemetery is up here. This is, the burial ground is up here. You can see it says burial ground. So that burial ground is still there. The fire required the large retaining wall that you see there that holds the street. And then down below that, dropping to another street level is there. And the brewery used to be right across here. This is all where all the new building is going on, for those of you who are familiar with Portland, excuse me, and all the new construction that's there. This is in many ways the heart of the Black community in Portland. And it has been until the recent gentrification that's gone on within the past 10 years, I would say. I became officially involved in the project in 2002. So we all have a long history with this project. And it started out quite small, but I have to admit, I was very optimistic, because not by necessarily this site in particular, but my experience in every single New England site I have worked in. And I think for you folks as architects, this is important to kind of keep always present in your mind. Every single site I've worked on, whether it's been in Keene, New Hampshire, or out in the Berkshires, or certainly in Boston, but in Portsmouth, there has been a component of Black residents, Black involvement. So this is not unique. This site is unique in that it's one of these very central Black churches. But the presence of the African diaspora and of freed Blacks and enslaved Blacks in our communities, whether it's rural or urban, is ubiquitous. And it's whether we open our eyes to it. So I encourage you to ask again and look again. And those times at night when you get that idea, write it down and go look in the morning, because it's there. So you weren't able to speak with John today, but this is John James working with Tony Booth, who's one of our archaeologists. It's important to also note that he was going to school as a jazz musician, and we switched him to archaeology, and now he is an archaeologist as part of his career. Tony provided us these very detailed maps for the exterior and interior. So what we did as an example of this tight cooperation between historians, architects, and archaeologists, we were able to use the maps and drawings that the architects created, and then build those as the base of our archaeological map. And that creates a conversation and a dialogue that is integrated in both of our conversations. We knew what we were dealing with. So I highly encourage that kind of literally a physical map that allows us to share information easily back and forth. Greg had mentioned the school, and I wanted to show you the images of specific artifacts we found at the school. So these slate pencils and clay marbles are exactly in the time period of the school. So that, again, this reinforces the presence of physical evidence to match the archaeological, the physical and the architectural and the historical evidence combined matches that. So it is not just, it was presumed, and yes, maybe they weren't there, or maybe they didn't hold classes. Indeed, they did, and we found the remains. And for those of you who ever wondered, yes, slate pencils can be dated. They are made at different ways at different times. And the Slate Museum in Cambridge, New York, near that deposit of New York and Vermont slate, has detailed examples of those, and I greatly appreciated their contributions. Now, these slides show what are many people might call these Africanisms, but really what we're talking about is objects that help us to truly understand the continuation of cultural practices through long, long periods of time and through different continents. So some of the things that I'm showing you in this slide show that continuation. This is down in the lower corner is the architectural side, showing the corner, literally the corner pillar of the building. This building is built with essentially like a mud sill. So down in the wet water, there is a sill placed in the mud. And then from there, stone is built. Many buildings in Portsmouth and in Salem, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and Salem, Massachusetts have archaeological evidence for this. So if you're looking in a very wet site and you can't believe that that really could happen, you all know in terms of your architectural history that indeed this can happen. And here in Portland, that's what's happening. But the scapula that's shown is an example of a practice of using scapulas of various animals. This is a small mammal, possibly a raccoon, to be placed at significant corners of a building or at significant places within a site. An abandoned tenement, of course, there's going to be rodent and small critter scapulas, but placed under the stones clearly meant that it was put there intentionally. And the archaeological evidence, we're pretty good at identifying rodent holes and critter holes. So we know that it was placed there versus just got there. Now, these two round discs, they are chipped glass. And we find gaming pieces at many sites, particularly sites of the African diaspora. But these are glass, and they're one of several that were found, what I would say strung, across the driveway, across Abyssinian Way, at about the same level. So it is not our interpretation as to what exactly they were, because we don't know that right now. But we do know that when you find chipped stone materials that are glass at African diaspora sites, and particularly where they're in a line, this is intentional placement of chipped glass objects. And chipped glass has, in many ways, properties with light reflection and that are very much associated with various beliefs in terms of spiritual beliefs and that. So the combination of a church and a meeting place with these two very significant recalls to literally another continent. And we'll see other examples of this, another example that is quite marvelous towards the end here. As I said, water plays a major part. The picture of Rick deep in mud, this poor man, he's worked with me on several sites, and every single one of them has been in cellars and in flood situations. So fortunately for me, and unfortunately for him, he's often been asked to be very, very wet. Rick Morris is another archaeologist who works pretty much extensively now in Maine. he was able to help us to identify, again, in Abyssinian way, wooden water pipes. And it's totally the luck of the draw that we ended up with an intersection of two pipes. Wooden water pipes are frequently found in New England cities. This water system, the city of Portland had a public water system very early on. For those of you who are interested in water sites or end up with a site where you need to sort out about water systems, there is through Cornell and through, I believe, the University of Syracuse University, there is, shall we say, a water system nutter. He has gone through and inventoried pretty much every public water system he could find in this country.
Oh.
So if you're, if you really need to find that information, I only found it with this, and it's an incredible site. So Portland had water pipes. What we haven't been able to ascertain with this water pipe, is this a supply pipe or is this a distribution pipe? And I will now talk to you about why on earth we would think there would be a distribution site from the Abyssinian Meeting House. But part of the reason why there's a distribution site, remember, it's on a swamp. Okay, so partly what we're talking about is draining the swamp. Now, before we go too deep into the water system, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how dynamic Portland's landscape is, its historic landscape. We are on a hill, we are in a swamp. So that already presents some dynamism in terms of what's going to happen. But here, Steve Roy, who's also a musician and archaeologist, and one of our volunteers, I think his name is Phil Lyford, who has long New England connections and was delighted to be volunteering with us. This is at the corner of the property. And what I wanted to do, we put this unit in mostly to establish, is this truly the boundaries? We wanted to be able to make sure we can do that. And most urban sites, we can find this, that the property boundary, when it's stayed the same for 300 years, you can pretty much find markers. So here in the graphic, you can see there's a place labeled post. There's a filled in gray vertical line that's another stone post. And then you see the wooden fence and a third post. So we have really good evidence of this being the corner post for some time. That's very helpful for us in terms of drawing lines compared to the deeds. But another important factor is that phrase, standing water, that is now at the base of the archaeological profile. So this is about a little over 4 feet of fill over time. And you can see how this begins to build. And really, the strata that's labeled 4 is really the surface that we're talking about at the time of the Abyssinian Meeting House. And the strata that's labeled Roman numeral 2 is the fill that came in about the time that the area was a junkyard and stable. It's important to realize, and I kind of had a hint about this, that when you see Russian Jewish communities growing in our seacoast communities, it's not unusual for it to happen where there is also a Black community, because what we're seeing is the Russian Jewish families come in at the time of the really strong Jim Crow eras. And I think what we're seeing is, and other, I'm basing this on other authors, not just myself, but I see it archaeologically, is you see a disbursement of New England's Black communities that were once quite cohesive are dispersed. And then this new community who is in leaving mostly the areas of Eastern Europe, but primarily Russia in New England, they are educated tradespeople who are trying to find a way into a new land, and consequently junkyards are where they are accepted within the fabric of the community. And so the Abyssinian Meeting House truly meets this, the same as we see in Salem, Massachusetts, Dorchester, Massachusetts to an extent, and then Portsmouth and now Portland. We have evidence of that kinds of transitions that are going on. Portland is somewhat different in that the continuing Black community in Portland is very strong and very stayed within Portland, where in our other Seacoast communities, they've often been further dispersed. So water is a critical factor here, and the fire is a critical factor, but Reuben Ruby and Wilberforce Ruby is a critical person within this. And we see in this image of the fire department, the red circled person is Wilberforce Ruby, who was very involved in the church. His father was patron of the church, somewhat had some disagreements with the churches financially, but was very much involved with helping to establish water being sold from the church. And this is a continuing process. Now, what it's being sold for, we couldn't tell at first. We were, is it holy water? Is it drinking water? What is it? But it's the obvious. You sell to people you know. And think about how many people of the Black community were involved in switching from transportation by wheel to transportation by rail. And so what they're doing is selling water to the railroad for the steam railroad. These pipes are a series of different drain pipes. We have not been able to find the exact style of the pipes that would have been used. So you can see so far we've had the wooden pipe and these two different kinds of pipes. We have some concrete pipes that are vernacularly known as Danny Shea pipes. They're a concrete pipe manufactured. There's a manufacturing plant that was in Portsmouth on the waterfront. So we know that water is being sold. And those historic maps that Greg showed you, we were so focused on the Abyssinian Meeting House that it wasn't until a few years later that I looked down the street and saw water reservoir. And I went, water reservoir. And then, so what we see here are two domestic buildings. Greg can correct me, but they're after the fire domestic buildings. And they are on top of the site that was the site for the reservoir. So the railroad had a water reservoir. And what we learned was that the water from the Abyssinian Meeting House went to the Grand Trunk Railroad. Portland, fortunately, has a very large railroad enthusiastic group who also happen to volunteer at archaeology sites. So we were able to begin to piece some of these pieces together one winter while, people who I had forgotten I volunteered with were sending me emails, but Martha, look at this kind of thing. So we were able to find a map that is at the Maine Historical Society that shows a water pipe that runs from the Abyssinian Meeting House to the reservoir and then down to the Grand Trunk Railroad. So they are selling water. And Greg's research shows that the water sales sometimes are credited, sometimes are not. Sometimes there's a dispute as to were they charged, were they not. But it is this interrelationship of a professional Black community who is working on the railroad with their faith place, the church, that is trying to find a way to make this all work together. That is true for all of us who are involved in our various social groups and professional groups and the fabric of our communities. And that's really shows to me how central the Black church was in terms of the railroad, but also in terms of the greater Portland community. So these yes, we do think about Black men being involved as Pullman on Pullman cars, And for Portland, many women were also working in the food preparation and food services for the railroad as well. Now, here is the image. So you see Abyssinian, we can see, and the railroad line there. And let's see here, we can see some of that. So it's these maps, these 19th century maps that people were so detailed about, help us to understand this in a way that the maps were never created for. And many of you know that as you do your research. So now I'd like to talk some about how this system of the water was transferred and how unbelievably preserved it was. We were absolutely amazed to see how this was preserved, because for many years, and perhaps I should have shown you, Deb and Greg saw this. For many years, you'd walk into the Abyssinian, and whenever I'd bring someone over, if we were going to a Sea Dogs game, I'd say, you got to come see this site. And we'd go in and we'd see, some days there would be water just pouring down the wall of the building. Other times you'd go in and it might be ankle deep. Other times it'd be considerably deeper. And it was all in the back of the building that had been mounted up with concrete. And the rest, it just didn't quite fit, but there was so much water. So we worked to try and bring the progress of the project forward, but always saving that back area of the building for our excavations and for time when we had the money and the time to be able to do that. So indeed, about the last time we excavated there was when we exposed this system. And there is a photograph, which I'll walk you through, but there is also the archaeological drawing, so you can get a sense of it. Essentially, what we have is a stone box and a wooden box. So you see by the stairs and the exit to the building, where it says exterior door, just about where the line that says E103, that's where we found that water pipe that you saw Rick Morris excavating. Right in, so if you follow a line, if you make a line from the D of door and the line of E103, right about that is where we found that water pipe. So if you continue that up, you go into the interior of the building. All of this is in the interior of the building. We'll go from the stairs to a wooden box. There are two wooden boxes that are shown by just the boards that are there. And then you go to a stone box further to up the image, and then a trail of stone. You can now maybe look on that photograph and see some of that. That pipe, the plastic corrugated pipe that you see, is the last of the drainage system to be hooked up until the archaeologists excavate. So what we see is very much, for those of you who've ever worked with a rural spring box, where you have to go and clean the spring that Robert Frost writes about in his poems. I was familiar with that, and I, called my dad and I said, so when you first moved to the house, what did the spring box look like? And then I began making more professional inquiries as to what we were looking at. And I spent a lot of time looking at French and English public water systems, because you see, this building was built at about the same time that public water systems were being established in England. And lo and behold, Mr. Wilberforce in England, one of his passions was public water and safe public water. So there was a good connection there with anti-slavery movement and safe water. Think about today and what we're talking about with Black Lives Matter and Detroit and free water, how long the struggle has been. So this is not new to the Black community, but this solution for it is quite wonderful, in that what we have is, I found out that the French and the English were looking to Africa, that some of the early French people who were looking to clean water was a single man who spent a great deal of time in Northern Africa. And he documented water systems that then he brought back to France that were then copied by the English. And the more I looked at his writings and those fabulous late 18th century drawings, the more I realized what we have. And this is very similar to what Peace Corps volunteers document. And consequently, part of that is I worked with a Peace Corps volunteer who now spends his time bringing clean water systems to people in Northern Africa and in Ecuador. And we went over the kinds of systems. What we have here is a sand filtered water system. And there are different ways that you can do them, but the Abyssinian Meeting House essentially used not the river system because they had their own water source, but this top one where there's a rough filter. So essentially the land is the sediment tank, and there's a rough filter, a sand filter, and then it goes down to a public water system. So they were providing free water or drinking water, but they were also providing water for steam power. So this is a very traditional way of providing clean water that they took advantage of by essentially being able to buy a plot that nobody else wanted. And you see this over and over again for the African diaspora of trying to figure out how to use plants, how to use pieces of land, locations that don't meet the requirements of what they would have or what their culture supported, but being in a different continent and a different place, begin to figure out a way to make it work, which to me as an anthropologist shows you the connectedness, the strength, the oral traditions, and also the fact that we, as particularly within the white community, forget about, or maybe are not knowledgeable about, the global existence in the early 19th century of the Black community and the connections between the Caribbean, England, and Africa, that there are people who are traveling to those places. There are people who are writing and communicating. And that is a really important part of that. Part of the people who did this, I wanted you to be able to see the actual faces of these Black ministers who are incredible people in their own right. But it also tells you how incredible the Black community and the people of the Abyssinian Meeting House were, who called these ministers. Congregational churches get to call their own ministers. They don't have the bishop deciding, they don't have somebody else. They may have some church political pressure, but every single one of these people on this slide have huge connections with the global African community, whether it is through the anti-slavery movement, some of them actually being freed slaves, whether it is through the Back to Africa movement in terms of making sure that Blacks have education and have their cultural rights and cultural traditions be allowed to continue. These people and their families worked very hard for that. And it is the Abyssinian Meeting House members who called them to be their ministers and to participate in their church, and they knew that. So it is not by mistake that these people came here, and it is with intention and knowledge that they are there, the same as the physical remains that we find archaeologically. A ship sinking and archaeological sites are merged seldom, but with the sinking of the SSS Portland, it is one of our first marine sanctuaries off the coast of Cape Cod. This is part of a much larger archaeological preserve. And the SSS Portland is indeed part of that. And people are allowed to dive and actually see this site. So any of you who are divers and get permits or can go and see that site, this is essentially the tomb of these people who you see in the newspaper clipping on the lower part of the slide. These are people of Portland and the people who worked again in transportation as part of this Black community, because that was one of the places where Black people were allowed to ply a profession. And so we have, excuse me, doctors and tradespeople and attorneys and people who are working as part of the transportation industry who lost their lives on that Thanksgiving Day. But that is their burial, essentially, is commemorated in that archaeological site as a marine sanctuary. This is perhaps my favorite slide of all the work that we did at the Abyssinian Meeting House. This is Leonard Cummings, Deb's dad, talking with a group of school children who were absolutely enthralled with hearing him talk about what was going on there. It is, for many Portland school children, particularly this age group, this is the age where the difference between George Washington, Moses, and Abraham Lincoln kind of all got swirled together. But they were able to hear Mr. Cummings talk about what was going on. They could work with us a little bit to see what was going on. But that, to me, is really what Deb and her family have talked about as the mission of the Abyssinian Meeting House. The plans to restore it are with a big classroom, to be able to tell the history of Portland's Black community. It is this kind of sidewalk visit that is so important for all of us to be able to understand this. So thank you very much. And I think we're at the point, Janet, where we can entertain questions.
Yes, absolutely. So everyone, actually, Martha, if you stop sharing your screen, if people are comfortable unmuting if you would prefer to unmute yourself and ask a question, we have a manageable group. So we're happy to handle questions that way. Or if you wanted to use the chat, I am happy to kind of moderate. But thank you, Martha, Greg, and Deborah, for sharing this story with us. I think, I have learned a lot in the past few weeks working with you all, and just this story is so relevant. And Debbie, I'm so, I guess, walking by the building now, I just think how you were so instrumental in saving the building. And was taking notes as we were talking about 1990. What year was it that you actually purchased the building for the restoration committee? 98 or something?
I don't remember right this second. I think I said,
The
I
title
think we
transferred
got it in
98.
90. I'm sitting here processing everything Martha said. A lot of it I had never heard, particularly as it relates to the water. And Martha, you did an awesome job, Martha and Greg. It's amazing that you guys learned that 20-something years ago, and you're still as passionate about it as you are. So thank you both. Is everybody still there? All of a sudden, the only thing I see is me.
We're all here. If you just change your view,
so I think that
perhaps,
we
to the
purchased
gallery.
it. I think we got it in 90. I want to say 95. My daughter was a baby when we got it back from the city, so it was around 95, I think. And then we started the work in 97. Right, Greg? Is that right?
Yeah, the actual deed transfer.
I'm not the one for
took
the
place in
dates.
98.
I didn't hear what you said.
Oh, there was a long process to get it out of the city's hands. So the actual deed transfer to the committee was 1998.
Interesting. Well, so I
That's
guess
right.
that's the interesting
And
to me as an outsider looking at all the work that you've been doing, that this work has been ongoing for many, many years. And then I think just looking at the neighborhood now, Debbie, if you hadn't taken the action and your family hadn't done the work that you, hadn't purchased the building, I don't know what we would be seeing there right now. But so I just want to commend you and your family for all of the work that you've been doing and making sure that the building survives. So it's quite remarkable when you see everything else that's happening in that neighborhood right now.
that, I think that a lot of people, interestingly enough, and this isn't well known, so we'll probably, I hope I won't break any news, but the building has become more and more interesting to people as we move forward. Sadly, we've had a couple break-ins recently. Some people, Martha had protected her artifacts really well. They suddenly ended up in Augusta. We don't know how, it just all of a sudden happened. And so we've got a lot of people very interested in not just the project, but also everybody knows that there's a lot going on down there now. I couldn't have done it without the support and help of, as I said, George Naval and Maddie Corson, who really sponsored the initial fundraising that we had to do to be able to pay Greg and Martha and John and the experts that came on board. This is a project that has passion behind it, passion, and including my mother and father. To this day, my father wakes up in the middle of the night talking about the Abyssinian, talking about it at breakfast. It's all he talks about, and he's quite frankly driving everybody a little crazy. But so, and Martha talks about it. Martha knows, she talked a couple weeks ago, hoping to be able to just have a nice chat, and he just went on and on and on about the Abyssinian. So thank God that the people who were there for the beginning had both the passion and the intellectual capacity to be able to move this project forward. I like to tell everybody, as I said, I'm a woman of faith, and I didn't know what I was going to do, how we were going to get this project back from the city. And I happened to go to dinner downtown, and I was on Milk Street, for those of you that know where Milk Street is, and George Campbell, who was a city councilor at the time, I happened to be going to see him, and on in the building he was working out of on Milk Street, I happened to look to my right when I got off the elevator, and Winton Scott had an office there. He was an architect. I don't know if Winton's still an architect or not, but I went in and I said, I need a favor. And I said, I can't pay you for the favor, but I promise you at some time it will make sense. And I said, we need some sort of drawing to be able to get the city to give us the building. And God bless him. He talked to his partner, and he came back and he said, I can't do much. I can just sort of sketch out something on a piece of paper for you, and hopefully this will be enough. And so I don't even know where that piece of paper is now. Probably it should be a part of our archives. But Winton Scott, God bless you. You were the reason why the city was able to meet the requirements that they needed from us to be able to sell us the building. And George Naval, Maddie Corson, who funded the whole thing initially. These are the people who believed that this was more than what it was showing to be, which was just a raggedy old building. I can't think of a better word for it. And then we got the A-team. Thank God. Thank God for you guys.
Yeah. And
I could go on and on. As you can see, we can all go on and on.
Well, no, I love it because it is such rich, deep information. So I appreciate that. And I do want to give anyone who wants to ask a question, please feel free to unmute yourself. But we do have, we had scheduled a little bit more time. And so I guess in the meantime, while people are thinking of questions, Tracy, did I see you raise your hand? Go ahead. You're muted, so you just have to unmute yourself.
Sorry.
Yep.
So for those of you who don't know, I purchased the Abraham and Harriet Niles house in August 2019, which is it was in some of the slides, it's immediately adjacent to the Abyssinian driveway. And Abraham was one of the founding deacons of the church. And I was just, as you were talking about the aquifer, this summer, the city replaced the water line, and they found some more wood pipe in the street. But I have a deed, there's one of the deeds for the house from 1844 where Abraham has, I guess, a deed with it. What does it say here? The what was it? The steam navigation company. And I just, is that, how did the water, because there are a number of lots, Abraham's, and Reuben Ruby was also, so you talked about William Wilberforce Ruby and Reuben Ruby, but they're immediately adjacent to the Niles house. So one thing I think that's lovely about the Abyssinian is not just a building by itself, it's a series of buildings that were built and owned by members of the Black community. But how did the water get from the Abyssinian or the Niles house down? There are a number of lots in between.
I haven't been, this is the question I have, and I'm delighted to hear about the wooden water, the find of the wooden water pipe there. That's the question. What we think it is a gravity-fed system, but but in order for it to go into the reservoir, you would have needed something like a hydraulic ram, which allows that's a system where water is essentially forced in, and you waste a lot of water by pumping it up and stuff. But that's the only things that I can think of, because you have this reservoir 2 lots down from you. Is it? I'm trying to remember exactly, but it's close by you. So we could see it going gravity from the 2 lots there, from the meeting house and the Niles house, but to go, how does it fill the reservoir? I'm unclear. And that frankly, we kind of squeezed our research in, and I didn't have, you move on to another project. So I haven't looked at railroad reservoirs very much, but I did look at other ones outside of Portland. The railroad dudes helped me with that. And a lot of those are gravity fed, with the tanks being built on those wooden structures. You see them in Westerns of the 1960s kind of stuff, where the water tower is above the track. This whole system is different. And I don't know if that's because it's urban or what exactly. Greg, do you have any insights about that?
No, that's one of the things that's on our list to eventually explore. We've been very focused on the site itself, but clearly its relation to the rest of the neighborhood raises all sorts of questions. So we did some little background research on the Niles family and on other families who owned houses in the vicinity, but we haven't done any subsurface exploration in the neighborhood, and that would be something that we'd love to do. It would certainly answer a lot of questions for us about how this all worked, and how much of it was independent, and how much of it was tied into other business ventures, or how much was related to general municipal improvements. So still, we have a long list of unanswered questions.
Yeah. So Tracy, if you decide that you're going to do anything to your yard that is deeper than the junkyard era 1920s fill, keep us posted.
That's great. Does anybody else want to chime in? I'll let you raise your hands or use the chat. I guess in the meantime, while we're waiting to hear from people, Debbie, do you want to share a little? Oh, Pamela, hold on. Okay. Pamela, did you want to say something? Yeah,
no,
thank you.
I was just giving an appreciation for the incredible passion and knowledge that everyone has brought to this project, and what a reminder it is. I mean, Jeanette and I both live just a couple blocks from here, as do a number of people who I see on the chat, and I walk by it all the time. And it's a reminder about how much these stories have been hidden from most of us for so long. And also when I saw the photograph of the school children standing at the gate with Mr. Cunningham, about the incredible power that these places have to tell those stories, and to continue to invent those stories and make them resonate with all of us. So thank you so much. And thanks, Jeanette, for making this possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think that might be a great time, Pam, just as you mentioned it, that image. I know that Debbie and I think Pam Cummings is also on the line. So Pam, if you're interested in unmuting yourself, I know you have hopes, plans, and also a call for the people who are on this call who are interested in buildings to maybe help in any way. But to get students into into that space, I think, is one of your big priorities.
So I was the chair of the development committee, and we did a lot of work with the school children in the city of Portland, and every year, not only the children in Portland, the whole state often has a lot of children that they like to bring through there, and the children are absolutely delighted. More important, the children of color, the way, the pride, the sense of pride that is built into them when they finally get to take a field trip to something that looks like them or tells their story. It's incredible. They come in, a little heavy, but by the time they leave, they are so light and so joyful, and so, they want to hug you, and it's incredible. And only coming into the building and experiencing that, will you really understand how important this is for not only, for most of the community, but for these children of color. You got to understand they have really never ever had any experience like this, because we don't even know most of the history. It's not taught, and it's been excluded from the textbook. So this becomes their first introduction to their history, or history from people that look a lot like them. That's number one. And then number two, yes, we have a lot of you that live near our building that we've heard from most recently, that I would just really like to ask. We have a building committee, meets maybe once a month. And I would really, your expertise, your knowledge in these committees are really paramount to their restoration. And if you have time, and if you would like to get involved, email me, and I'll give you my email: Cumipa, C-U, M as in Mary, M as in Mary, I, P as in Peter, A, Cumipa at AOL.com. Please email me. Please get involved in this project. It's a strictly volunteer, and we just love to have your knowledge, your wisdom, your understanding on a committee like the building committee. That would be fantastic.
That's perfect. Well, I think what I can easily do
So
then, Pam,
let me just, Tracy.
oh yeah,
Can I'm sorry, Jeanette. Let me just add to that. While since Pammy just talked about Pammy, you said the development committee. I think you meant education. We really are. Jeanette and I have talked a little bit about the opportunity that I think the building presents. I had applied for a grant a few years ago for a STEM grant, and those of you in the industry understand that everything you do is around STEM. Maybe this, and Martha just talked about the archaeological piece of it, which is the science piece of it. And a lot of people don't understand that. In order for us to see more young people, Black and brown people, that are a part of the economic development piece of the community, we've got to begin to put these kids into the building to help them to understand the science of it, the technological aspects of what they have to do, the engineering aspects, the math aspects. And my understanding is STEM is now STEAM, and certainly the art part of it. So we are talking with the Abyssinian and Jeanette, and I'm hoping AIA will partner with us to be able to do a STEM project or two, maybe a workshop, maybe this year a workshop, next year a longer camp, but the goal is to be able to bring kids into the building on a workshop to help them to understand the STEM that's right there. A lot of kids love history. They don't understand that this all ties in together. So that's where I would look to you all to talk amongst yourselves, figure out how the organization can partner with us to do a STEM workshop this summer, hopefully in the end of June, early July.
That sounds great. And so what I can do is I have everyone's contact information that registered for this program, so I can connect us all through email, and so people who are very interested in participating and in sharing ideas and thoughts, you can connect with myself and then Pam and Debbie at the same time. But yes, obviously there's some overlapping interests there to get people into the Abyssinian Meeting House. And then, I've mentioned to Pam and Debbie, we as AIA Maine would love to be able to have a little bit more representation or have expose people, students in Maine to the architecture profession. And so we're trying to think about ways we can overlap there with some programming. So I guess with that, unless Debbie, you have anything else you'd like to say, or Pam, before
No,
we
I do
close?
want to thank, Pammy, you probably want to add to this, but I do want to thank, Peter, or I can't remember his name, Paul Stevens, I think it is,
Mhm.
who was an integral part of the building committee that my father chairs, along with a few other people in the community as we completed the phase 4 of the restoration project. You said that you walked by. I'm seeing several notes of people that walk by. Please know that we are very close to completing the exterior restoration effort, and are going to be moving inside to do the work internally that needs to be done. And I know Pamela certainly welcomes anybody that's interested in volunteering for that project, that committee, to get involved. I'm raising money, as I said, I'm always raising money. So I'd be remiss if I didn't encourage you to go to either our Facebook page, feel free to mail us a check, or however you want to do it. I know your organization has done some fundraising as well, but we certainly welcome everything that you can donate. And if you know anybody that wants to go into the building, though it is a pandemic, my daughter's always reminding me that we're in a pandemic. We're hoping to be able to make the building available to people sometime towards the middle to end of July, as it loosens up a little bit here in the city and state.
And then I
Thank you.
And then this
Thank
is
you, Greg
Pam.
and Martha.
I would like to correct. I am so sorry. I thought I told you education. I headed up I was heading up I head up the education committee. I've been doing a lot of work with Debbie in the development committee. So that was truly a slip, if that's what I said. I am education, not development. So sorry about that.
That's okay. We at AIA Maine know all about committees and how confusing they can be, the overlap. So no worries there. Excellent. Well, thank you all. Thank you, Martha, Greg, Debbie, and Pam, for all the work that you do and for all the work that you continue to do. And I will reach out to everyone who has registered via email. If you have an interest in getting involved, please do let us know. And AIA Maine will be doing our best to be working with the Abyssinian on some of their future programming. So thank you for the work that you guys do. And thank you so much for helping us organize and pulling together this presentation today.
Thank you, Jeanette.
All right, I'm going to sign off. Take care, everyone.